like to take your seats again, I'll remind everybody to please turn off the ringers on your cell phones. And with that, I want to welcome you to Ohio EPA's information session and public hearing regarding a preferred plan to address contamination at the former Hamilton Standards Controls Facility in Lexington. My name is Christopher Weiss. I'm a Public Involvement Coordinator in Ohio EPA's Public Interest Center in Columbus, and I'll be moderating this evening. I have a lot of colleagues here this evening, including Edward Onier and Archie Lundsey from our Division of Environmental Response and Remediation in our Northwest District Office in Bowling Green. From the same division, but working out of Columbus, are Tim Christman, Brian Tucker, and Curtis Herlocker. And Mark Navarre from our legal services team is also here this evening. In just a couple of minutes, I'll turn it over to Edward, who will give a brief presentation on the plan, and then we will open up the floor for your questions. On behalf of the agency, I want to thank you all for taking the time to attend the meeting this evening. If you haven't already done so, please visit the registration table at the back or the front of the room, depending on your perspective. We have sign-in sheets there if you'd like to be on the mailing list for this project. We also have a copy of the presentation that you'll see on the wall back here, and we have information on appeals opportunities as well. Ohio EPA holds the meetings of this type to provide information on actions that the agency is considering, and also to obtain comments from any interested person, anybody who's interested in the plan to clean up the former Hamilton Standards site here in Lexington. So we're going to have a two-part meeting tonight. First will be the information session. Again, Edward will give a brief presentation, then we'll open up the floor to your questions. This will be followed by the public hearing. And the hearing is your opportunity to make comments on the official record. They will be recorded by the court reporter who's here this evening and entered into Ohio EPA's official record. And with that, I will turn it over to Edward, who will give you a brief overview of the proposed preferred plan. And Dina, if you could get the lights.
Again, welcome. My name is Edward Onier. I'm the site coordinator for the project. I've been involved now for over 20 years in this project. I'll just give you a quick history and background of the site. The original facility was constructed in '53 by Stephen Manufacturing. Over the years, there were change of ownership. In February of '88, it was transferred to Hamilton Standard. In June of the same year, Hamilton Standard ceased operation at the facility and sold the plant to Lexington Properties, which is a subdivision of Denison Corporation in Columbus. Lexington Property leased the facility to different, 3 or 4 different companies before finally in '97, all manufacturing ceased at this site. Over all these years, the line has been the same, making electronic components, electrical switches. Ohio EPA became aware of the contamination in '87 as a result of violation of discharge permits. At that time, Hamilton Standard decided that they would enter into negotiation with Ohio EPA Division of Surface Water. That was before my division was formed in '88. So in '88, Ohio EPA issued an order to clean, if possible, and find the source of the contamination, and if possible, contain the spread of the contamination. As a result of that agreement, Ohio EPA and UTC arrived at an agreement to construct a tower, an airstripping tower, as a remedy. That continued until in '89, the site was transferred to my division in '89. At that time, it became quite obvious that we needed to do something more extensive. So we entered into a new negotiation with UTC for a full characterization of the nature and extent of the contamination. At that time, Ohio EPA and UTC decided that the best way to proceed would be through a legal order, and that was a consent agreement signed in 97. As a result of that order, we started the remedial investigation in, I believe it was 98. No, it was in 89 we started initial investigation. In 98 we started the remedial investigation for soil contamination. If you're taking a look at some of the maps in the back, you'll see where we have the soil contamination defined. Soil contamination at the site is localized in two different areas. One of the more serious than another is mostly, can you point it out? Sorry. It's mostly between the tower, I'll point it out for you. Most of the soil contamination is near the tower, this airstripping tower, and this area where we have monitoring wells. At that time, it was quite obvious we were having much more problem than we expected. And part of the order we signed in '89 allowed us to invoke an interim action. An interim action meaning that we have to do something quickly. And that interim action led us, I'll talk more about interim action, but it led to more extensive remediation program than we expected. This is a summary of the risks we have at the site. If you look at the basic risk here, the groundwater risks are not different from the soil risk we have at the site. It's mostly direct contact, inhalation of TCE. TCE and PCE, trichloroethylene and tetrachloroethylene, were the contaminants at the site. They are really degreasing agent used by the manufacturer to degrease metal products. That's where the contamination came from. If you look at the soil, it's exactly the same problem we have with groundwater. Injection, direct contact, inhalation. Part of the order signed in '97 was for a remedial investigation and feasibility study. The feasibility study is just a study of possible ways to clean up the contamination. And when we started looking at what's feasible here, we had, for the soil, we looked at 4 different alternatives. No action, vapor extraction, chemical oxidation, soil evacuation. I'll talk more about this later on. We also looked at the soil alternative here. You see for the soil alternative, can we go back and show them something? if you look at the soil alternative, the reason we always do this, people always ask, why study no action? That gives us a baseline for the rest of the study, for the rest of all these other studies. That's why we do the baseline study. So when we looked at what's possible here, what's the feasibility here, what can we do here? We looked at this alternative, soil vapor extraction. Soil vapor extraction was already in place as a result of the interim action when we decided we needed to do something more immediate. That was the system installed, so we know it was working well. So that's one of the alternatives we went back and take another look at. This alternative here, which is in situ, meaning in place, chemical oxidation, was an injection effort. You inject the chemical, the sodium permanganate, into the formation, into the soil formation to clean up and to oxidize. It's oxidation procedure. So it oxidizes TCE, PCE, the contaminants into non-toxic end products. We looked at this possibility because it's so obvious. Why don't we dig up all the soil and dispose of it? But when you look at the depth of the contamination, it wasn't possible, economically feasible. So that was never really seriously. We also looked at groundwater alternative. What do we do with the groundwater? Again, we say no action as a baseline. And then we looked at air spudging. We're already doing this. We looked at bioremediation. We looked at trenches, which is what this is really. I'll talk more about it later. And the pump and treat we already done, which is the air stripper. This particular alternative, air spudging, when you drive past the site, the location, you see the system outside the property now. That's part of it is this. It's a network of about 643 wells originally. What involved is injecting air into the system below the water table and then extracting the contaminants out of the ground. This is a bioremediation alternative we looked at. The basic problem we have attempting this, it takes so long to do. Not only that, from all indication, when you look at the soil, you don't have any indication the nutrients are there for the bioremediation to work. We went back maybe a year ago and took another look to see if there is any evidence of the nutrients being available to help this alternative work. No, we don't have it. This is actually an interesting way of doing it. Simply have a trench. You inject zero valent iron and then place it in the trench to stop the contamination from going forward. We looked at that. It's expensive. We were not sure if it would work. The confidence wasn't quite there when the look was taken here. These are actions we've already taken That's part of the reason it's taking us so long to get to this point, because of all these actions we've taken. In 87, when we first discovered the contamination at the site here, part of the effort, I think Mayor Parkinson is the only one still around that, and maybe Chuck remembers this. A sampling plan was put in place. We started monitoring municipal system, both Mansfield and Lexington, collecting water samples and taking a look at what's going on. I think then you have well number 3, 4, and 5, maybe 6 after that. Part of the original agreement Ohio EPA signed in '88 was the installation of this pump and treat system. It ran for a very long time. Systems of this nature has one basic problem. When you install this system, the idea is to pull, because it's an extraction system. It pulls the contamination and then treats the contamination and vent the contaminants in air. But if you don't have enough capture zone, if you don't pull enough, it has limited capture zone, meaning it probably doesn't go 20 feet away. The rest of the contamination, as you can see from one of the maps, has gone way beyond Lexington property, meaning that this wasn't working well. That's what he told us. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten across the street into private property on the other end. This is the largest vapor extraction system. Generally, you see these two together, air spurging and vapor extraction system together. This is the largest one we have in Ohio, by far the largest one in Ohio. Over the years, since it's been running, it started in '01. As of the last report I received was, I think it was in June report. It's done quarterly report. This system has extracted something about 3,500 to 5,000 pounds of TCE and PCE, TCE, PCE being the decreasers used here, the contaminant at the site. So we have extracted up to 5,000 using this as an interim action. In '04, while the system was working, there was a concern from UTC investigation. UTC is the responsible party here. They took over from, they owned Hamilton Standard. UTC became concerned, and we all agreed on the need to do this chemical oxidation, injecting sodium or potassium permanganate into the soil formation and to clean out the contamination that is attached to the soil. That's what we did here. Over the years, while we were doing some investigation, we found out there was, the contamination was detectable on private businesses down on the other side across the Plymouth Road and roundabout there. We decided at that time, UTC and us, decided the best approach at that time was to continue the investigation, conduct indoor air sampling, soil sampling, install some monitoring wells. We met with the property owners and their consultant. Back and forth, we finally agreed on the need to put vapor mitigation systems on the properties that are may be affected and the one that was affected, one of the three properties were affected, or maybe one was really affected. The other ones, UTC and us agreed to put a system in to protect those two properties. Because we don't have any detection that tells us there is a problem there, but they went ahead, UTC went ahead and still installed the system on those two properties. What is a verbal mitigation system? It's a system that once installed, you will keep contaminated vapor from getting into a building. And it does that by creating negative pressure in the subsurface. That way, contaminants don't get into your business or your residential buildings. That's what these are. Before we arrived at a decision on what would be the best plan for this site, the best way to clean it up, we have some criteria we use for evaluation. We look at overall protection, human health and environment. Does this comply with the law? How effective it is? Is it reducing toxicity? We look at those. We look at short-term effectiveness. How effective is it on the short term? We look at the long run too. Is it possible to implement? How much does it cost to do this? And will the community where this is being done accept it of it being installed? Well, we finally, after doing those analyses, we came to what we consider to be our preferred plan. For the soil, we have so much confidence in this system we have, vapor extraction system. We look at the results we're getting and our ability also, because there are so many wells running here. Originally it was 643 wells running. And we met with UTC and their consultant about 6 months ago and said, well, it's not as effective as it used to be. What can we do to make this work even better? And the decision was made that we can adjust this by rotating how many of them are running at one given time. Because not all 600 plus are running at the same time. Most of the time you have maybe 100 running, another time 200 running. So we increase the number running and the duration they run. That will help us. We looked at alternative 2 for groundwater. Clearly the air spudging, injecting clean air beneath the water table, agitating the water, and the extraction system sucking it up. That seems to be working. You look at the numbers we're getting, close to 5,000 pounds. That's a lot of chemicals being extracted already. We looked at institutional control, like covenants, stopping, prohibiting people from digging and extracting water, things like that. That's a good thing to do for this particular area. We look at building occupancy, people living in that particularly on site. Again, most of the contamination in soil is on site. The groundwater contamination is the one that's spread out. So, prohibition here. To limit this to industrial use, where people don't spend more than working hours there, that's a good option. Well, what are the next steps to take here? will accept comment until the 24th of January. If you have any comment, no matter what it is, we are obligated to respond to it. After we take a look at the comment, there is a section we call the responsiveness section. All the comments will be put in that section for anybody to take a look at. And based on those comments, we'll make a recommendation to our director. And once the director makes a decision, that will be, before the director makes a decision, we develop a decision document. And that will be the basis of the decision on what will happen here. So we are still open for comments. Okay? And that's me.
Thank you very much. The final slide you'll see is my colleague, Darla Peel. She is the agency's citizen contact for Northwest Ohio. She couldn't make it this evening, so I am filling in for her, but if you have questions subsequent to tonight, Darla would be the appropriate person for you to comment. So with that, Dina, you can get the lights. With that, we'll go ahead and open up the floor to your questions. I'll just ask that if you have a question, you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and the appropriate colleague of mine here will answer your question. And then after that, we'll go into the public hearing, and that'll be your opportunity to make comments on the record. And again, we will be accepting comments in writing through close of business on the 24th of December. So yes, sir, I saw you.
Yes, Richard McCleary, 94 Mohican Trail, Lexington. Will we be given a copy of this presentation?
There's copies right there
Okay.
on the front
All
table.
right.
Dina, I think can get one for you. I'm sorry that you didn't have it to follow along. I apologize.
Will you put a copy of the map up here so we can see it and see what areas you're talking about?
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
That's on the back.
And there are also larger copies of the map in the back, on the table back.
Okay. This map, oh, I'm sorry. This map we have here is just for the groundwater.
Dim the lights a little bit again, make it a little easier.
As you can see, there are two chemicals of concern here, two decreasing agents here. This one in blue here is the tetrachloroethane, the PCE, and this is the tetrachloroethane, the TCE. So there are two chemicals here. This is how far they have moved. And we have confidence that all this is what it still basically looks like.
It is what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
What it still looks like, the area.
Okay. And the other one doesn't look like that now?
No, I said this is, here is the PCE, this is what it looks like. The TCE is this one here, the larger one.
And it still all looks like that?
Yes.
Anybody else have any questions?
I have a
Yes, sir.
question.
Yes, sir.
I have not heard any numbers or any data reflecting how the TC levels in groundwater have decreased to acceptable or standard levels. Is there any information showing that the treatment has worked to acceptable levels?
We have been tracking this, we've got over 100 monitoring wells out here. We've been tracking it for really since the late 1980s. Since this system's been installed, we've seen about an 80 to 90% reduction in the contamination levels that are out there in the plume. We've been tracking it, and we've seen a significant reduction. This system is working. It's pulling the contamination levels that are out there in the groundwater plume down significantly. Now, is that answering your question, sir?
No, if I live, say I live in a residential area just west of the main former site, What assurance do I have that the TCE levels are now acceptable?
And if you live in the area due west of the site, that area has never been contaminated by the chemicals.
I live south of the site.
Let me go up here, I think I can help you a little bit with this, if I can point it out. If you lived in one of the houses right along here, our data shows that the contamination has not migrated underneath those houses. That is, you're not going to get impact from the plume in the houses that are immediately south of the site. Our monitoring wells show that it has not moved that far. They're also showing that there's not any vapor risk in that area either. So, these houses are not being impacted right now. A lot of the major reason for that is the groundwater moves in an east, you see it in a west to east or slightly southeast direction. It is not moving in a southerly direction through the plant.
Well, let me restate my question.
Yeah.
Have the levels of TCE been lowered to an acceptable level anywhere?
Well, they have never been, in the area, in the houses immediately south of the plant, they have never been over an acceptable level. Not in all the years we've been doing sampling.
Do we have any
Well,
data?
let me go back for just a second. Is the nature of your question, is the groundwater contamination meeting an acceptable drinking water standard?
Talking about groundwater levels.
So you're trying to figure out whether or not the remedy that we have implemented as an interim action and are recommending is actually treating groundwater so that it meets a
Yes.
drinking water standard.
Yes.
The answer to that question is no, it's not meeting a drinking water standard right now. The reason that we can still recommend moving forward is because the groundwater that is impacted is not being used for potable purposes. The residents of this particular community are being served by a municipal system. So there is no chance for the general population to be adversely exposed to that groundwater as long as the municipal system continues to supply groundwater, one. Two, we are looking at environmental covenants which would prohibit the extraction of groundwater for potable purposes on any of the affected parcels.
Okay, I have another question, and I'll shut up, I promise. I think the plan references the structure, the former site, Hamilton site. It's now a concrete slab. Is there a reason the plan doesn't mention that? And I think the plan even talks about the green space. There's no green space, there's a concrete slab there. Can you explain why your plan doesn't address that?
What the plan does address is the future disposition of that facility. In other words, because there are residual soil contaminants there, we're saying that it would be unacceptable for someone to convert that property into residential space.
Is that into perpetuity, or is there a timetable on that?
The best way to answer that would be for the foreseeable future unless otherwise demonstrated that the soil contamination and/or groundwater contamination for indoor air, for that vapor portion, are demonstrated to be acceptable.
But the goal of the cleanup system is to eventually get it